Hi, and welcome to this lesson on organizational behavior. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at what exactly is organizational behavior, why do we want to study it, and what does it mean to our organizations. Now, by definition, organizational behavior deals with how people, groups, and an organization structure influence behavior within the organization. Now, understanding this is pretty critical because the more we understand how people behave and why they behave the way that they do, the better we can understand how we can influence that behavior to change the organization's effectiveness. If we look at this from a more simple standpoint, basically what we're looking at is organizational behavior is a study of what people do and how it influences organizational performance. Now, people always wonder, does organizational behavior really matter? Isn't this just the squishy stuff? Does this really impact how our organizations perform? Now, what I would tell you is I spent over a decade in industry. And truthfully, the way people behaved in industry is what inspired me to leave industry and go into academia. I saw some things happen when I was in industry that I could not make any sense of. For example, I was in a Fortune 500 company and we had a staffing model that didn't work, and I was able to talk to the vice president of human resource management, and they verified for me that the model did not work for the location that I was managing. But when I spoke to my boss would hear nothing of it. And the reason was because my boss was afraid to talk to his boss about this. So, I really began to wonder things like, how do cultures of fear emerge? How do we find ourselves in a place where people are so afraid to talk to their bosses that we're not being as effective as we could be? So, from that standpoint, organizational behavior sure does matter. Then we run into the problem where people think they understand everything about organizational behavior, even though they never really studied it. So, for example, there's an organization that I had a relationship with that I know surveyed some of their employees and they asked a question about empowerment, but they didn't use a validated survey. They didn't use something that scientists who study organizational behavior had come up with and verified that it was going to capture what they were looking to capture. They used one question that some people in a back room of an office came up with, and they threw it on a survey. And then when they got a response back that said people didn't feel like they were empowered, managers just told the employees they didn't know what empowerment meant. They didn't actually have good data on anything that they were capturing, so they weren't able to use that data to influence organizational outcomes. So why does this kind of stuff happen? It's what I call the OB trap. And this is something that managers and students sometimes fall for. Okay. So the first stage in the OB trap is we look and we say organizations are made up of people. All right. Then we look and we say, I am a person and I understand me. So by the transitive property, I understand people and I understand people in organizations. And we just kind of assume that because we're people, we understand organizational behavior. But the reality is that that's not the case because organizational behavior is a science and we need to learn about it. Now, we can really start to understand why organizational behavior is important when we think about what it is that managers do and what we need to run effective organizations. Now, Luthans and Associates took the activities that managers engage in and they broke them down into four different categories. The first category that they identified was what they call traditional management. This is kind of your decision making, your planning, your controlling. Okay, so do we build a new factory? Are we going to purchase this product? All that type of stuff would fall under traditional management. Then they looked at communication, how we exchange information throughout our organization. Now, this could be receiving information from others and also passing information on to our subordinates and our peers. Then they looked at managers engage in human resource management types of activities. So they have to motivate their people, they have to discipline them, they have to deal with conflict, they have to make staffing decisions, they have to make sure their people are trained appropriately. All the different things that we typically think of within human resource management. And then they also finally looked at networking. And the idea with networking is that we're socializing, politicking. Basically, we're working on building our relationships and managing relationships with people within the organization. Now, the reason that the work that Luthans did is so important is because as we look at different managers, we find that they break up their engagement in these four different types of activities very differently. So we'll start with looking at kind of our average managers over here. And when we look at our average managers, they spend about 20% of their time networking, 20% of their time engaging in human resource activities, about 30% of their time engaging in communication, and another 30% of their time engaging in traditional management. Now, when we jump over here to our successful managers, and these are the managers who are earning a lot of money, they're climbing the ladder within their organizations, we find that they spend almost half of their time engaging in networking. Okay, almost half of their time engaging in networking. And then they spend about a quarter of their time in communication. And then the rest is split between traditional management and human resource management. Okay, now we jump over here to effective managers. And effective managers are different from successful managers because effective managers are people who produce the most efficiency within their organization or the most productive managers. They don't necessarily get the best promotions, but they are the most productive. When we look at these effective managers, what we see is that they spend almost half of their time communicating within the organization. Okay, now if we jump over to networking, which was the big key for successful managers, effective managers only spend about 11% of their time there. And then they spend a quarter engaged in human resource activities and about 20% engaged in traditional management, according to Luthan's research. So now let's take a look at some of the current trends in organizational behavior. One of the trends in organizational behavior is that we are looking at the global workforce, meaning that the workplace never sleeps. Okay, so in some areas, what this means is that we have people positioned all over the world to make sure that we are active 24 hours a day. At other times, though, it can make it very difficult to try to schedule a meeting. Okay, I remember a time I was trying to schedule a meeting with a colleague in India, and because of the time difference between our two locations, we had to pick a very odd time for a meeting because we were trying to pick a time that wasn't in the middle of either one of our days or where nobody was going to be sleeping. So we ended up picking a time that was very late in the day for me, but very early in the day for this person. Communication technology today basically means that some of us have a lot of trouble disconnecting from work. I'll give you an example. Very recently, I happened to be reading a research article at midnight because I just couldn't sleep. And then the first thing I did when I was done was I sent it to a colleague. Now, why would I send a colleague a research article at midnight? That's probably not the best thing that I could have done. But if that person had their alerts turned off, no problem. But it's very possible they could have got that email in the middle of the night for absolutely no reason. When I was in industry, I remember there was one time where one of my colleagues took vacation, and while they were on vacation, they made a point of leaving their work cell phone home. Came back from vacation and they quit because they said the entire time that they were on vacation, they kept reaching for their hip where they usually kept their cell phone because they were so used to having their phone go off all throughout the day. Another trend in organizational behavior is that people are working longer hours than ever before. I remember when I was in industry, it was considered a badge of honor to tell people that you would work more than 70 hours in a week. Family lifestyles have also changed. Two income households are more common than they ever have been before, and there are many single parent households as well. I know that in my own house, my wife and I have four kids, and there's always kind of a balance in terms of how do we manage each other's careers so we can make sure that we can be home as parents and perform our responsibilities there as well. Consistent with changes in family structure, we're also seeing a lot more need to have balance in terms of work and family life out there for employees. There was one point in my career where I actually switched companies because one company offered me a better schedule that was going to allow me to coach my kid's soccer team for the first time in my entire life. And many other people are making similar decisions. We're seeing demographic shifts in the workplace also. If we go back to 1970, you see there's a pretty big gap here when we look at the proportion of males in the workforce compared to the proportion of females. Okay, but as we move up closer to 2015, 2020 area, we see that gap has closed quite a bit. Now, increased diversity in the workforce is really beneficial to organizations in ways that such as idea generation and creativity as we bring in a variety of different perspectives, and it helps us to look at things from all different angles and come up with better solutions than we could before. But with diversity, we come to have different cultural perspectives, different communication practices and so on that can sometimes create challenges in the workplace. So, it's very important that managers are skilled in both understanding one, how to benefit from all the great things that diversity can bring to us, but two, how to address some of the challenges that can arise as well. Now, big data is opening up some opportunities in organizational behavior as well. There's a variety of different types of data that we're starting to gain access to, and in many ways, there's a lot of unexplored areas here. There's a lot of interesting benefits that can come out of learning more about our employees, but there's also ethical challenges as we have to identify what data it's okay for us to use. These are all things that managers are going to have to address moving forward. Now, as we move forward with this lesson, it's important that we take a moment to just really quickly make sure that we have a consistent definition for manager and organization, that we have a shared understanding here. So, a manager is someone who gets things done through other people in the organization. Okay, so this can be any type of leader who has subordinates under them that they use to help achieve goals. Okay, and then an organization is a coordinated social unit that has multiple people in it and works together on a continuous basis to achieve a common goal. Now, notice we didn't say a business. Now, a business can be an organization, right? So, a large multinational corporation, um, such as like an IBM or something, could is obviously an organization. But a football team could be an organization. A nonprofit can be an organization. A college is an organization. So, the term organization is a very broad term here. Now that we've established what a manager is, let's take a look at some of managers' functions within the organization. Now, Mintzberg defined some managerial roles, and the first group of roles that Mintzberg identified, they fall under the interpersonal label. Okay, and the first one we'll call a figurehead, and this is somebody who's symbolic and does kind of routine duties that often are social in nature. So you'll notice that I have a picture here of somebody doing a ribbon cutting, right? Because a ribbon cutting is ceremonial in nature. All right. There are many things that managers and leaders do within organizations that are for purposes of visibility, and those are things that fall under the role of a figurehead. The next interpersonal role is that of a leader. Okay, so we've got a picture here of Sean McDermott, the coach of the Buffalo Bills. Coach McDermott is responsible for motivating players, getting them going in the right direction, and so on. As we think about what it is that a leader does here, we can go back to when we talked about those HR responsibilities of managers, and many of those fall kind of under this umbrella of a leader. The final interpersonal role that Mintzberg identified is that of a liaison. And a liaison maintains a network of contacts who they get information from. Okay, so when I was a manager in the field, I often had different people who were in purchasing and other areas that I would talk to continuously to understand what was happening in the markets in which I did business. So I knew when I had to be prepared to make a move. And That's what you're doing in the role of a liaison. All right. So next, Mintzberg identifies some informational roles. The first of which is a monitor, and a monitor receives information from a variety of different sources and kind of serves as the center of incoming information. This role can overlap with the liaison a little bit because sometimes a monitor has people that they get information from, but they also have other data sources and they may go out and collect information on their own. In the role of a disseminator, a leader's job is to now transmit information throughout the organization or make sure that employees and members of the organization are getting the information that they need. So, what you'll see here down in the bottom is that I have a memo sent out by a leader to members of an organization in the very beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. And they were just passing along information about everything that they knew about coronavirus at the time to keep their employees informed so that they could be safe in the workplace. Now, the final informational role that Mintzberg identified is that of a spokesperson. Okay, and a spokesperson's job is to basically communicate information to people outside of the company or the organization that might be relevant to these people. Okay, so the example that I have here is this is Governor Cuomo, who is giving a press conference where he's sharing some information that about things that are happening within New York State that he thinks it is in the best interest of the public to know. So Governor Cuomo would be serving as a spokesperson in this role. Then Mintzberg identified roles that were referred to as decisional. Okay, and the first one of those was the entrepreneur. So somebody within this is when managers in the organization are searching in the organization and its environment for opportunities and initiating projects to bring about change. Okay, so this shows Google Labs. You might have a manager in Google Labs looking at a project that could change the company. When I was in industry as an entrepreneur, one of the things that I chose to do in one of my businesses was I discontinued a huge product line to open up square footage within a retail store and then brought in a new product line that nobody in my geographic area was stocking. Okay, ended up being a great decision, really helped boost our business, but that was me acting in the role of an entrepreneur. Managers also act in the role of a disturbance handler. So when we have unexpected negative actions happen in the workplace, managers are also often called in to either fix them or make decisions about how to fix them. So the example that I give you here is a forklift accident at a job. Okay, a manager would typically be called and be asked what to do about that. Okay, you often see managers get called in retail stores when there are customer service issues. All these types of things when managers are handling problems is them acting in the role of a disturbance handler. Managers also serve as resource allocators. Again, as resource allocators, they have to decide who gets what. So they'll make decisions about which departments get how much money out of their budget. They might make decisions about who can have time off and who doesn't have time off. But all the different types of decisions that managers have to make where there are finite resources and they have to determine how to distribute those resources. Those are all decisions that fall under this category of resource allocator. Finally, managers also serve as negotiators. Okay, and as a negotiator, a manager may be representing the organization in terms of identifying terms for a contract. It may be a sales negotiation. There's all sorts of different ways that managers negotiate. But basically, when they're negotiating, they're representing the organization's best interest and trying to find terms that the organization and another party can all agree on. Now, there are three different groups of skills that we'll talk about for managers. And the first one is called technical skills. And this is basically the ability to apply specialized knowledge or expertise within the job. All right, managers sometimes need some technical skills, but they don't always need all technical skills. Where technical skills come to play, though, and they help out a lot, is later on in this course, we'll be talking about expert power, and the more technical skills that a manager has, the greater expert power that they're going to have. When I was a manager, one of the things that I found was that if I didn't have technical skills in an area, sometimes my employees would use that against me a little bit. Okay, because they would have a little more power, they would have the expert power because they had the technical skills, and that would remove me from being able to participate in certain parts of a decision. So the more I was able to attain technical skills, the more I was able to maintain my power by having expert power in that situation. Then we have conceptual skills, which are just the ability to analyze and diagnose complex problems and situations. So basically, to be able to look at a situation where we have a problem and we have to fix it and be able to work our way through that problem. And then we have human skills, so the ability to work with, understand, and motivate other people. And human skills are really critical to organizational behavior. Now, building on this idea of human skills and interpersonal skills are really important because good places to work have better financial performance. So you can look up Forbes top 100 best places to work. And what you'll often find is that when you look at that list, you'll see a lot of organizations that are also performing very well. Okay. And when people have better interpersonal skills, they tend to result in lower quality or lower turnover of quality employees because your quality employees feel valued based upon the interactions that they have with their management. Okay, we also see some strong association between the quality of workplace relationships, job satisfaction, stress, and as we just mentioned, turnover as well. So the better people are able to communicate, the better job satisfaction their employees have, and the lower their stress levels tend to be. Within organizations, we also deal with challenges related to ethical dilemmas. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on in the course. And, ethics itself is something that we could dive really deeply into, as I teach an entire course just about ethics in organizations. But sometimes it's not really easy to define what's ethical and what's not. In my ethics classes, we tend to get some really good, heated debates about what the ethical thing is to do in different situations. What's important to remember is that ethical issues arise when our goals come in conflict with our values. Okay. In some cases, this is a little more clear than in other cases. And managers really need to work to try to create a healthy ethical climate and minimize the likelihood that goals and values are going to come into conflict with each other. Now, one of the other advantages of making sure that we understand organizational behavior and we work to improve employee attitudes and increase job satisfaction is that service employees have a lot of interactions with our customers, and their attitudes and behavior are associated with customer satisfaction, which is going to have a direct impact on our profitability. Okay, so to be profitable, service oriented businesses need to have kind of a customer responsive culture, a culture where we are looking to make sure everything is right for the customer all the time. And this can be a difficult change because historically, a lot of organizations had fiscally responsible cultures that weren't necessarily aligned with customer satisfaction. Okay. Now, the real challenge here is that managers have to communicate a clear vision, because if employees think the manager's vision is one thing, but the vision's actually something else, we're not going to have consistent experiences for our customers. And that could be really problematic. Okay. I managed in the retail field, and one of the challenges that I would come into from time to time is that my company's culture had changed over the years. So we had gone from being very cost conscious to very customer focused. And some of my employees had a hard time making that adjustment. Okay. But if you communicate it thoroughly and effectively and you make sure that you have open dialogues with your people, you can be successful here. Another challenge in organizational behavior is the idea of a networked organization. A networked organization is a situation where people might be managing in one location, they might have employees in another location. So a company I have an affiliation with has locations in Albany, New York City, and Central New York. And a manager in Albany might have employees that work for them in Central New York and employees that work for them in New York City. Okay. We're seeing this type of thing emerge more and more in different organizations. And in addition to seeing this emerge more and more naturally, the coronavirus pandemic has actually expedited this a little bit. So this is something that looks like it's here to stay in the field of organizational behavior. Managers often like to make decisions based upon gut feelings or intuition. And the challenge with gut feelings or intuition is that we have some missing information there. Okay. We don't have all the data that we could use to make our decisions. And often this can open us up to some biases in decisions as well. Okay. So one of the things that we're trying to move towards is the use of a systematic study of behavior, or understanding that people's behavior is kind of predictable if we study it properly, and building off that and integrating it with evidence-based management so that we look at data from past transactions and use that to inform future decisions. It's important that we understand, though, as we think about understanding patterns in behavior, is that there's few absolutes in organizational behavior, and that's because of something that we call a contingency variable. And contingency variables are basically something where we have kind of situational factors that influence the relationship between two other variables. Now, the easiest way to understand a contingency variable is to take a look at a relationship here. So what we have here in this diagram is we're going to look at the relationship between working late, or asking our employees to work late, and an attitude called work family conflict, which is basically an employee's perception that work is getting in the way of family. Now, often we'll try to look at a direct relationship between variables like these, but here's an example of a contingency variable. We have the employee's family situation. So the relationship between working late and work family conflict is going to be very different for somebody who's single than it is for somebody who is a single parent or somebody who has a large family. If somebody's a single parent or has a large family, we might see that this relationship between working late and work family conflict is very, very strong. Okay. Somebody who's single and doesn't have a lot of family, though, may not have as strong a relationship between working late and work family conflict. When I was managing, I had some employees who were willing to work late and put in long hours all the time because they weren't rushing home to anything. But then I had other employees who did have families at home that didn't want to work late, because when they worked late, that did create some conflict for them. Now, we are going to wrap up this lesson talking about the three different levels of analysis in the basic OB model that we're going to use kind of throughout this course here. Okay, so as we start, we're going to look at this, and we're going to see we have our inputs into our model. Okay, and these inputs are going to exist at the individual level, they're going to exist at the group level, and they're going to exist at the organizational level. And when we think about the inputs here, really, they're kind of answering the questions of who, what, when, and where. Now, the next phase in our model here, we have processes within the organization. And the processes, again, exist at the individual level, at the group level, and at the organizational level. And the processes, as you look through each of these lists here, they really answer questions kind of about the how things are happening within the organization. Then the model completes with outcomes. Okay. Once again, we have outcomes at each level: individual, group, and organizational. And where we're really going to be focused for most of this course is in the individual or the group level. Okay. Then, based upon these outcomes, what we see is that organizations come back to the beginning, and they revise or reassess inputs. And as we talk about outcome variables, we're going to start with outcome variables at the organizational level. And the first one we have is productivity. Okay. And an organization is basically considered productive if it's effective and efficient. And some of the measures that we use to assess productivity are things such as return on investment, return on assets, and sales per square foot. The other important organizational outcome that we're going to look at is survival. Okay, and survival deals with basically is does the organization have the capability to continue in existence and hopefully grow over the long term. Then we move on to group outcome variables. Okay. And when we think about group outcome variables, the first one we have that we'll talk about is group cohesion. And group cohesion is basically focused on how well a group sticks together. Okay. So we use the technical definition as the extent to which members of a group support and validate one another, but it's really basically how well they stick together and how well they work together. Okay. Then we'll look at group functioning. And group functioning refers to the quantity and quality of a group's work output. Basically, I want you to think about this as group productivity. Group productivity is a good way for framing what group functioning really is. Finally, we're going to start looking at outcome variables at the individual level. And there's four different outcome variables we're going to look at here today. The first one being organizational citizenship behavior. Okay, and organizational citizenship behavior, which you might sometimes be see referred to as OCB. Okay, this is kind of a discretionary behavior that's not necessarily part of somebody's formal job requirements, but it's good things that they do within the organization that are things that they don't necessarily have to do. Now, the easiest way to really understand what organizational citizenship behavior is to think about what are some examples of organizational citizenship behavior. So I threw a few of them together for you here on the screen. So the first one is somebody might act as a peacemaker. Okay. And when they're acting as a peacemaker, they're kind of downplaying things that are negative within the organization and trying to keep the peace between coworkers. They might attend functions that they're not required to go to. So a company might have a really important function that's not necessarily part of someone's job description, but they go there. Okay, think about a high school principal attending a school play. They're not required to be there, but it's really great if they are. Okay, when people have organizational citizenship behavior, they often are encouraging others and helping others out. These are all examples of OCB. Okay, the next outcome variable that we're going to talk about is attitudes and stress. All right, and employee attitudes are evaluations that employees make about different objects, people, events, the organization. Okay, and we're going to spend a lot of time on attitudes in the over this course. And if you're watching this video because you're enrolled in my course, understanding attitudes is really going to be critical to the model that you're going to make in your project. Okay. And then we also have stress, which is an unpleasant psychological process that occurs in response to environmental pressures. For myself, I know when I feel stress at work, I often feel a little bit of heaviness in my chest. I feel heaviness in my breathing. Okay. So stress, even though it's a psychological process, can physically impact you. Next outcome variable we'll talk about is withdrawal behavior. Okay, and withdrawal behavior is basically when you kind of separate yourself from the organization. And this can happen in a variety of ways. Sometimes when employees are experiencing withdrawal behavior, they might start showing up to work late. They might be less engaged when they're at work, so they might be on their computer, but they might be on Facebook or Twitter instead of actually working. Those are all examples of withdrawal behavior. Now, the ultimate withdrawal behavior is employee turnover. Okay, so when somebody quits, when they leave the company, that's obviously the ultimate withdrawal. And if you're watching this video because you're enrolled in my course, employee turnover is the outcome you're going to try to influence in your course project. So it's important to pay attention to. The final outcome variable that we're going to discuss today is task performance. Okay, and this is just basically effectiveness and efficiency at the individual level. All right, so when you think about task performance, you're thinking about this as productivity in terms of the individual. Now, if we go back to the model that I showed you a few minutes ago, once again, like I said, we're going to be looking at outcomes at the individual and the group level for most of this course. Okay. Now, that is not in any way, shape, or form meant to discount outcomes at the organizational level, but organizational behavior tends to focus on this big circle up here with the understanding that these two areas here are going to influence the organizational level. So as we wrap up here discussing why organizational behavior is important, we recognize that people care about outcomes at the organizational level. That is not being discounted in any way, shape, or form. But it's important to understand that what happens at the individual level up here is going to influence what happens at the group level here. And ultimately, that is going to influence what happens at the organizational level. So OB kind of looks at business from a little bit of a different angle in that we're still looking at how are we going to impact things at the organizational level, but we're looking at it through these two areas here.